His executive assistant slapped me in my husband's glass-walled office because I took one bite of the chocolate cake sitting beside his promotion packet. Chloe's hand cracked across my cheek before I even swallowed the bite of cake. The whole floor heard it. Coffee cups froze midair. A junior analyst near the doorway stared at his shoes like the carpet had suddenly turned interesting. Apologize to Chloe, Carter said. Not, are you okay? Not, why did she hit you? Just that. Like I was a temp who'd wandered too close to somebody else's party. I set the silver dessert fork down. Slow, quiet. The cake sat on his desk next to a thick manila folder. His promotion packet, the one going to the board Friday morning. Chocolate layers, raspberry filling, bright red between the dark cake. Carter hates raspberry. He's hated it since our second date, 9 years ago, when he scraped the filling off a bakery tart with a paper napkin and made a face so dramatic I choked on my coffee laughing. After that, raspberry became our joke. He bought it for me on purpose. Every year, on the anniversary of that terrible first tart. Never once did he buy it for himself. Now it sat on his desk on the biggest day of his career, and Chloe stood guard over it like it belonged to her. She helped herself to your cake, Chloe said, sweet as poison. Behind the glass wall of Carter's office, half the senior staff of Ellison Meridian Partners had gathered for what was supposed to be a quiet celebration before Friday's board vote. Martin Ruiz from finance gripped his coffee cup so hard the lid bent. Dana Whitlock from marketing kept folding the same napkin into smaller and smaller squares, refusing to look at me. Nobody came in. Nobody said a word. They just watched my husband choose his 27-year-old executive assistant over his wife of 9 years in front of everyone without blinking. My cheek was still hot. I didn't touch it. Carter, I said, when did you start liking raspberry? A small question. A big crack. His face flickered, just for a second, just long enough for me to see it, before the boardroom mask slid back into place. Do not try to turn this around, he said. I'm not turning anything, I said. I'm looking at what's already here. Chloe crossed her arms. This is pathetic. Maybe it was. Maybe 9 years of not quite looking had made me pathetic. But I'd stopped being the kind of woman who shrinks so someone else can feel tall 3 weeks earlier. The day I opened a bank letter that had nothing to do with cake or affairs or Thursdays. It had my late mother's name on it and a number that didn't add up. Do not bring your father into this, Carter said suddenly, sharper than anything he'd said yet. There it was. Not, don't leave me. Not, don't be hurt. He said, don't call the one man in this building who was never once impressed by Carter's title, his glass office, or the girl currently guarding his cake like a trophy. That told me exactly where the real fear lived. I picked up my phone. I let him watch me hold it before I unlocked the screen. I tapped one name. The line began to ring. Somewhere down the hall, the elevator chimed. Carter went pale before my father even answered. To understand why a phone call could do that to a grown man running a $200 million company, I have to back up 5 months to a Thursday afternoon that meant nothing to anyone but me. My name is Naomi Ellison Voss. I'm 36. My father, Richard Ellison, built Ellison Meridian Partners out of a single freight brokerage in 1987 and grew it into a logistics and private investment firm with 1,100 employees. I've worked there for 9 years. Officially as head of portfolio operations, unofficially as the person who fixes whatever breaks before the board ever hears about it. Carter Voss came into my life at a fundraiser my father hosted, all easy charm and good posture, the kind of man who remembers the names of everyone's assistants. My father liked him immediately, which should have told me something because my father has never liked anyone immediately in his life. 5 years after we married, when my father stepped back to chairman emeritus, the board elevated Carter to CEO. I stayed exactly where I was, head of operations, no board seat, no public title, because my father believed, and I believed too, that keeping the company's real work quietly in the family was safer than putting a target on it. Chloe Bennett was hired 14 months ago as Carter's executive assistant, 27, sharp, ambitious in the specific way that makes older men feel young again. I liked her at first, the way you like anyone who remembers your coffee order. That's the part that still makes my jaw tighten. I want to be fair to who I was before all of this, because it matters for what comes later. I wasn't a naive woman. I ran operations for a company with 1,100 employees and a 9-figure balance sheet. I caught vendor fraud twice in my first 4 years there, both times before it reached 6 figures, both times quietly, without ever needing a headline. I was good at my job precisely because I noticed small wrong things before they became large wrong things, which is exactly why it still humiliates me a little even now, that it took me 5 months to apply that same instinct to my own marriage. We tell ourselves the people we love get a different kind of scrutiny than a vendor invoice. We're wrong about that. We're just slower to admit it. My mother, Eleanor Ellison, died 4 years ago and left behind behind the Eleanor Ellison Family Trust, $8.2 million, meant to fund my future children's education, and eventually a community health foundation in her name. Because Carter was family by then, my mother had named him co-trustee alongside me, a decision I never questioned until the January afternoon a distribution statement arrived at our house instead of the trust's usual P.O. box, and a routine annual report meant for me quietly landed in my hands. But in that January, none of that had happened yet. In January, I was still the kind of wife who noticed a new block on Carter's calendar, every Thursday, 2 to 4 p.m., labeled simply private, no address, no attendee, and told myself it was nothing. Executives get private time. That's the job. In February, I noticed the wedding photo was gone from Carter's desk, the one from our reception, both of us laughing at something off camera, the only photo he'd ever kept there in 9 years. Office redesign, he said, not looking up. Feng shui. The consultant said personal photos read as cluttered to clients. I told myself it was nothing. Consultants say strange things. I let it go. 3 weeks later, at the firm's holiday in February client mixer, I overheard Chloe telling a vendor, breezily, "We'll get that scheduled through our office." Not Carter's office, not his assistant's desk. Our. She caught herself half a second too late and laughed it off as a slip of the tongue. My stomach dropped half an inch and didn't come back up. I asked Carter about it that night, as casually as I could manage with my pulse hammering in my ears. Chloe said, "Our office today?" Funny phrase for an assistant. She's been there a year, Naomi. People pick up habits. He didn't even look up from his laptop. Smooth, rehearsed. That's what got me. How ready the answer was. Like he'd built it in advance. I didn't confront him further. Not yet. A slip of the tongue isn't evidence. People get wrongly accused over less. That same week, I noticed the cologne. Carter had worn the same drugstore aftershave since business school. I used to tease him that it smelled like a locker room trying to apologize for itself. Suddenly, there was a heavy glass bottle of something French on his side of the bathroom counter. Turned label out at first. Then, a week later, turned away from the mirror entirely, like even he'd stopped wanting to look at it. Gift from a client, he said when I asked, comes with the territory. You give, you get. I told myself it was nothing. Executives get gifted things constantly. Pens, watches, bottles of scotch, nobody drinks. It's not a crime to smell different at 41. But I noticed, too, that he'd started showering before bed on Thursdays, which he never used to do, and that the shower ran a full 4 minutes longer than it used to. I noticed the way you notice a clock ticking louder in a quiet house. Not because anything changed about the clock, but because you finally stopped talking over it. In March, reconciling our joint credit card for taxes, I found 4 separate charges at a boutique hotel called the Ashford Suites, 40 minutes outside the city over the previous 5 months. Always a Thursday, always between $310 and $480. Client retreats, Carter said. The Meridian account, the one with the shipping contract renegotiation. I told you about this. He hadn't, but he mentioned 100 different clients a week, and I'd stopped being able to keep them straight years ago, which is exactly the kind of marriage fog a man like Carter learns to use. My hands weren't steady holding that statement, not trembling, shaking, hard enough that I set my coffee down before I spilled it. I sat at the kitchen island for 10 minutes, just breathing. That night, I confronted him directly for the first time. Statement flat on the counter between us, like evidence in a trial I didn't yet know I was building. 4 Thursdays, Carter. Same hotel, same amount roughly. What client stays at a spa resort for a shipping contract? He laughed, an ugly rehearsed laugh I was starting to recognize. You're really going to interrogate me over hotel points? This is exactly why I don't tell you things anymore. You turn everything into an accusation. I wanted so badly to believe him that I almost let it work. That's the part nobody explains about gaslighting until you're living inside it. It isn't that the lie is convincing. It's that you want it to be true, more than the person telling it does. I let it go, again, but I started keeping my own folder. Digital, backed up, dated. I didn't know yet what I was building it for. In April, the trust statement arrived at the house by mistake. Addressed to me, meant for the trust's administrative P.O. box. I only opened it because I thought it was a birthday card from my aunt. It wasn't. It was the Eleanor Ellison Family Trust's quarterly distribution report, and it showed a disbursement of $340,000 to an LLC I'd never heard of, Belrose Holdings, authorized under a co-trustee signature, Carter's signature, dated the same week as the second Ashford Suites charge. I stood in my kitchen holding that report and felt the floor tilt. I called the trust's administrator, a woman I'd spoken to maybe twice in 4 years, and asked, as evenly as I could manage, what Belrose Holdings was. I can pull the authorization file, Mrs. Voss, but I'll need Mr. Voss's sign-off to release details to a co-trustee, per the trust's dual authorization clause. A perfectly reasonable, perfectly maddening answer. The very structure my mother built to protect the money was now the wall keeping me from seeing where it had gone. I confronted Carter that night with the statement on the table. He didn't laugh this time. It's a bridge loan, he said, for a co-investment opportunity. I was going to tell you once it closed. It's temporary, Naomi. It comes back with interest. For from my mother's trust, without my sign-off. I'm a trustee too. You're my husband first. He looked at me like that distinction had never once occurred to him. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark doing math on my phone under the covers. 4 Ashford Suites charges. 1 missing. He looked at me like that distinction had never once occurred to him. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark doing math on my phone under the covers. 4 Ashford Suites charges. 1 missing wedding photo. 1 slipped pronoun. And now $340,000 that belonged to my dead mother's foundation moved into a company I couldn't find a single public record for. In May, Denise Okafor, the firm's VP of Human Resources for 11 years, called me into her office, not because I'd filed a complaint, but because someone else had, anonymously, about an inappropriate reporting relationship between the CEO and his executive assistant. Denise slid a printed policy sheet across the desk, the standard non-fraternization clause every employee signs. I have to ask you directly, given your position here, Denise said, not unkindly. Are you aware of anything that would substantiate this complaint? I said I wasn't sure yet. It was the truth. It was also the first time I understood that other people in that building had already seen what I was still trying not to see. 2 weeks later, Denise told me, almost apologetically, that the complaint had been reviewed and closed, insufficient evidence, and that Carter had personally signed off on Chloe's promotion recommendation to Chief of Staff, a new role created specifically for her, with direct oversight of trust and foundation correspondence. My mother's trust. Under Chloe's desk. That was the moment the affair stopped being the worst part of my week. Around the same time, I finally saw the full draft of Carter's promotion packet. President and co-CEO going to the board that Friday, sitting open on the shared drive. 22 pages. 12 of them were operational efficiency wins from the past 3 years. My wins, my scheduling fixes, my vendor renegotiations, my quarterly savings reports, all folded into his narrative without my name appearing once. He hadn't just taken my mother's trust and my marriage. He'd taken my work and put his name on it, the same way he'd been doing to everything else in our life for years. I stopped trying to catch him with words. I decided to catch him with proof. I found Frank Delgado through my father's old attorney, a licensed private investigator with 24 years in the field, 11 of them as an NYPD detective in the Economic Crimes Unit before he went private. His office smelled like burnt coffee and old case files. I need you to be honest with yourself before you spend a dime, he said, sliding an intake form across the desk. Most people who come to me already know the answer. What they're really paying for is documentation, not discovery. I told him I understood the difference. I wanted proof I could hand to a lawyer, not a feeling I could argue about at 2 a.m. Within 11 days, Frank had time-stamped photographs of Carter's Audi at the Ashford Suites on 3 separate Thursdays, arrival and departure logged from a legally parked vehicle on a public road. He had photos of Chloe's silver Volvo in the same lot, arriving within 20 minutes of Carter each time. He'd pulled public filings on Belrose Holdings and found it was registered 8 months earlier to a single member, C. Bennett, Chloe's legal name. Chloe Ann Bennett. I want to be clear about what this gives you, Frank said, handing me a manila folder with a case number stamped on the tab. It proves a pattern, and it proves an entity. It doesn't prove where the trust money physically sits today. For that, you need someone who reads bank statements for a living. He also walked me through what the file didn't have, which mattered almost as much. No photographs taken through windows. No audio recorded without consent, which isn't legal in our state without at least one party's knowledge. No trespassing on private property to get a better angle. A judge throws out anything obtained wrong, Frank said, and then he throws out your credibility along with it. I'd rather hand you a thinner file that survives cross-examination than a thick one that doesn't survive the first objection. He charged me $2,400 for 11 days of surveillance, itemized down to the mileage on his own sedan, and I paid it from a small inheritance account from my grandmother that Carter had never known existed. The first time in months I'd felt like I was building something instead of just absorbing something. That someone was Priya Anand, a CPA and certified fraud examiner, with 15 years auditing family trusts and closely held companies. I brought her the distribution report, Frank's file, and every credit card statement I'd saved. Priya traced the $340,000 through 2 intermediary accounts before it landed, 3 weeks later, as a down payment on a condominium in Chloe Bennett's name. Not a loan, not a bridge investment, a down payment, 31% of the purchase price, wired directly from Belrose Holdings to a title company. This isn't a gray area, Mrs. Voss, Priya told me, sliding a printed ledger across her desk, tabs labeled Exhibit A through Exhibit F. A trustee moved beneficiary funds into a shell entity, then into a personal real estate purchase for a third party, without co-trustee authorization. That's not aggressive investing. That's breach of fiduciary duty. And depending on how the state's Attorney General's Charitable Trust Division wants to read the foundation clause, it may cross into criminal misappropriation. I sat in her office for a long time after that, staring at Exhibit D, a wire transfer confirmation with Carter's signature at the bottom, dated the same Thursday I'd first noticed his calendar block back in January. Every red flag, lined up end to end, finally pointing the same direction. Warren Pierce had spent 20 years litigating fiduciary and trust disputes, the kind of attorney who talks slowly because he's already 3 steps ahead of you. I sat across from his desk with Frank's folder, Priya's ledger, and 4 months of my own handwritten notes. Here's what you need to understand, Warren said, after reading everything twice. The affair is going to matter for your divorce, dissipation of marital assets, the Ashford Suites charges. All of it. But the trust is a separate animal entirely. Your mother built dual authorization protection specifically, so no single trustee could move large sums alone. Carter didn't just cheat on you. He used a legal role your mother gave him in good faith to defraud a charitable foundation that bears her name. What do? You don't confront him yet. The board votes Friday on his promotion. If he becomes co-CEO before this surfaces, removing him gets exponentially harder. New employment contract, new severance triggers, new leverage. We move before Friday. Not after. Warren connected me that afternoon with my father directly, not as a parent, but as chairman emeritus and the trust's original grantor, with standing to demand an emergency accounting. My father listened to 11 minutes of documentation without saying a word, then said only, "Send me everything tonight. I'll be at the office Thursday." He didn't ask if I was okay. That's not how my father shows up for people. He shows up with folders and lawyers and a very quiet, very specific kind of fury. I understood, hearing his voice, exactly why Carter had said, "Do not bring your father into this," the moment he sensed the ground shifting. Thursday, I had 24 hours before the board vote, and 8 hours before Carter's version of handling it apparently involved my mother's foundation cake, decorated in the one flavor he'd hated for 9 years, sitting on his desk like a taunt he didn't even know he was making. I couldn't focus on anything that morning. My hands wouldn't stop moving, smoothing my skirt, checking my phone, tapping a pen against my desk in a rhythm that meant nothing. I drank 2 coffees I didn't need and made everything worse. Twice I walked to the small kitchen on our floor just to run cold water over my wrists, a trick a doctor once told me for panic that presents as a racing heart rather than an obvious attack. I hadn't needed it in years. I needed it constantly that morning. Priya texted at 9:12 a.m. Title company confirms condo closing finalized Friday 10 a.m. If we don't freeze the account today, the funds are gone into real property and much harder to claw back. Warren texted at 10:40. Filed emergency motion for accounting. Judge won't hear it before Friday morning at the earliest. We need pressure from inside the building today. My father texted nothing. My father called at 11:15 and said 4 words. I'll be there Friday. Friday was the office celebration. Friday was the board vote. Friday was also, apparently, the day everything Carter had built out of my mother's money and my 9 years of silence was going to either finish closing or fall apart in front of everyone who'd ever watched him take credit for something he didn't earn. I went into the office that Friday morning already knowing 3 things Carter didn't. That Priya had frozen what she could of the remaining trust balance by noon, that Warren's emergency motion had a hearing scheduled for Monday regardless of what happened today, and that my father was already in the building, 1 floor down, reviewing the promotion packet's operational appendix with a red pen. I did not know Carter was going to put out a raspberry cake to celebrate a promotion built on my stolen work in front of the whole floor, and that his mistress was going to slap me for eating a bite of it, which is where we started. Chloe's palm across my cheek. The fork set down slow and quiet. Carter's voice saying, "Apologize to Chloe," instead of asking if I was hurt. "I'm not calling him about cake," I told Carter, phone already in my hand. "I'm calling him about what you thought I'd just keep accepting." The elevator chimed down the hall. Carter's face had already gone the color of the frosting. My father didn't need me to explain anything when he stepped off that elevator, because he'd spent the last 18 hours reading Priya's ledger and Warren's motion line by line. He walked into Carter's glass office in his shirt sleeves, past Martin and Dana and the junior analyst still staring at his shoes, and set a single folder on the desk next to the ruined cake. "Carter," my father said, "we need to talk about Belrose Holdings before this room votes on anything." I watched every ounce of composure drain out of my husband's face. Not dramatically, quietly, the way a building loses power floor by floor when a breaker finally trips. "Richard, I can explain the structure. It's a shell company registered to your assistant," my father said, flat and even, loud enough for the glass wall to carry it. "Funded with $340,000 from a trust that bears my late wife's name, moved without co-trustee authorization, and used to buy that same assistant a condominium closing this morning. I have the wire confirmations. I have the forensic accountant's report. And I have an emergency motion in front of a judge on Monday whether this board votes for you today or not." Chloe's fingers slipped off the cake plate. "That's not," she started. "Ms. Bennett," my father said, not even raising his voice. "You're terminated effective immediately immediately for cause per Section 11 of your employment agreement. Security will walk you out. I'd suggest retaining your own counsel before Monday. The board vote never happened that Friday. My father, holding own counsel before Monday. The board vote never happened that Friday. My father, holding a majority voting share he almost never exercised, called an emergency session instead. Carter was placed on immediate leave pending the outcome of the fiduciary investigation, then formally terminated 11 days later once Priya's full forensic report went to the audit committee. He resigned his trustee position the same week, under threat of a civil suit that Warren had already drafted. The state attorney general's charitable trust division opened a civil inquiry into the Belrose transfer 2 months later. Carter avoided criminal charges only by agreeing, in a signed consent order, to repay the full $340,000 plus interest, and to accept a permanent bar from serving as trustee or fiduciary of any charitable entity registered in the state. Chloe was named alongside him in the civil complaint, on the theory that she'd knowingly accepted misappropriated trust funds. Her condominium closing was voided, the deposit clawed back through the title company before the deal ever finalized. I filed for divorce the following Monday, walking into Warren's office with the same folder Frank Delgado had built for me, 4 times as thick by then. Dissipation of marital assets, breach of fiduciary duty, a paper trail of Ashford Suites, charges Warren's filing dryly called expenditures inconsistent with the marital estate. The court's equitable distribution order, 6 months later, accounted for every dollar Priya had traced. My father reinstated me publicly that same quarter, not as a favor, he was careful to tell the board, but because the operational wins in Carter's abandoned promotion packet had in fact been mine all along, and it was time my name sat on my own work. I became chief operating officer of Ellison Meridian Partners in September, the position Carter had spent a year building a case to steal. Martin Ruiz, the finance director who'd bent a coffee lid rather than say a word that Friday, sent me a card the week the announcement went out. Inside, he'd written only, "I should have said something in that room. I'm sorry it took a title change for me to say it now." I keep that card too, next to Priya's ledger, for the same reason. Not because I need the apology, but because it reminds me how many people can watch something wrong happen and still convince themselves it isn't their place to speak. The audit committee's outside counsel, a fiduciary specialist named Miriam Cho, later told me the Belrose file became something of a case study for the firm's new compliance training, an anonymized slide deck now shown to every new officer during onboarding. I've sat through that training myself twice, and both times I recognized every exhibit number without needing to read the caption. I still keep Priya's ledger, Exhibit D and all, in a drawer in my new office, not because I need it anymore, but because I earned the right to remember exactly how it felt the day nobody believed me and the day everyone finally had to. Denise Okafor apologized to me once quietly in the break room for closing that anonymous complaint too fast. I told her I understood. The system she worked inside wasn't built to catch a man that careful, not until someone outside it decided to look harder than her job description required. She's rewritten the firm's reporting policy since then. I read the new draft before it went to the board. It's better now. It should have been better before. My father and I don't talk about that Friday much. He's not a man who revisits things once they're settled, but he still buys me a raspberry tart every year, on the anniversary of my second date with Carter, a joke I once thought belonged to my marriage and have since decided belongs entirely to me. Carter never did like raspberry. He never had the stomach for anything that wasn't handed to him already sweetened. I do. I always have. And I finished that slice.